You're just a captain." He laughed. She outranked everyone in the room. "You're just a captain, sweetheart." He said it with a smile. The kind of smile that invites everyone else to join in. Colonel Richard Harlan stood at the center of the Camp Pendleton Joint Operations Briefing Suite. Silver eagles gleaming on his collar, chest ribbons arranged like a trophy case, and he said it like it was a joke. Like the punchline was already obvious, like the only question was who would laugh first. The words cut through the briefing suite like a blade scraping metal. 41 people stood in that room. Officers, intelligence analysts, a Marine sniper instructor with 23 years of operational service, 2 JAG attorneys reviewing classified materials in the far corner, 4 Army Rangers who had flown in from Fort Liberty at 04:30 for this joint briefing. 41 people, and every single one of them heard Colonel Harlan say it. Every single one of them looked at her. Every single one of them waited to see what she would do. She did nothing. Captain Mara Voss, according to the temporary access badge clipped to her left breast pocket, was 31 years old, 5'4". Her dark hair was pulled into a regulation bun, so precise it looked like a diagram from a grooming manual. She wore a standard-issue duty uniform with no combat patches, no specialty insignia, no additional qualifications sewn onto her sleeves. The uniform of someone passing through. A contractor, maybe. A liaison. Someone administrative. A technical observer assigned to review communications infrastructure for the week and then return quietly to wherever she had come from. Her eyes were the kind of gray that catches light differently depending on which direction you look. Right now, they were fixed on the disassembled M110 sniper rifle laid out on the table in front of her. She was reassembling it, field stripping and rebuilding, while she waited for the briefing to begin. Her hands moved with the grip of someone trained well beyond anything her apparent role required. The angle of her wrists, the spacing of her fingers, the economy of each motion, no wasted movement, no hesitation. The kind of muscle memory that doesn't come from a manual and doesn't come from a range course and doesn't come from anything less than years of repetition in conditions that do not allow for error. She did not look up when Harlan spoke. She did not flinch. Her breathing slowed. 4 counts in, hold 4, 4 counts out, hold 4 so precisely that the Marine instructor standing nearest to her caught it and felt something shift in his chest that he couldn't immediately name. "Colonel." Her voice was quiet, controlled. It carried exactly as far as it needed to. "Higher than yours, sir. You just don't know it yet." Then she set the assembled rifle aside and turned her attention to the intelligence summary on the table in front of her. Harlan's smile tightened at the corners. A muscle moved in his jaw. Then the smile expanded, a performer's recovery, generous and encompassing. And he turned back to the room and swept everyone into it. "You heard that one, right?" The Rangers exchanged a look. Someone near the back chuckled, nervous, one note too high. The room breathed again. In the doorway to the adjacent corridor, Sergeant Major David Rice had stopped moving. He was 62 years old. 34 years of service distributed across 3 wars and 8 deployments he still couldn't discuss in general company. He had a face that looked like it had been used for something. Not rough exactly, but marked the way certain tools are marked by the specific work they've been designed for. He didn't carry extra weight. He didn't move with ceremony. He moved the way people move when they have been in enough situations to understand that efficiency is a form of safety. He had come through this wing to collect a materials report for the base commander. He had paused 3 steps inside the doorway and was now not moving at all. His jaw was set. His pen had stopped against his clipboard. His eyes, gray and patient, and the kind of careful that does not announce itself. the kind built over decades of watching things other people missed, were fixed on Captain Mara Voss, specifically on her hands. The grip, the angle of her wrists when she had handled those rifle components, the spacing of her fingers during assembly. Rangemaster Rice had only seen that grip trained into operators at schools most of the people in this building had never heard of. Schools that do not appear in standard recruitment materials. He stared at her hands, and then at her unmarked sleeves, and then at the rifle, now fully assembled and set aside with an effortlessness that could not have come from a desk. Something about this woman. He couldn't place it yet, but it was there, solid and specific, the way recognition feels before the conscious mind catches up to it. His pen stayed still. He watched. Colonel Richard Harlan was a man who performed power rather than possessed it, and the distinction had never mattered to him because, in 17 years of rising through administrative ranks, the performance had always been enough. He was 54, 6'2". He stood in rooms with his arms crossed the way certain men stand, not in relaxation, but in statement, like the posture itself was a claim on the space and everyone inside it. His record was clean. His evaluations were uniformly excellent. His operational experience was thin, 2 years in Kuwait in the early aughts, 1 non-deployable injury, and then a swift lateral into intelligence coordination, where he had demonstrated a particular gift for ensuring other people's competence reflected well on him. He had been at Camp Pendleton for 3 years. He intended to be here another 2, and then a posting to the Pentagon. He had already begun laying the groundwork, the right invitations accepted, the right papers published under his name in joint intelligence journals, the right conversations at the right receptions. He was meticulous about the machinery of advancement. He had been meticulous about it for 17 years. It had never failed him. The thing about machinery is that it only works as long as the underlying structure holds. He was, in the truest sense of the term, genuinely arrogant, not cartoonish, not theatrical in the way that would make him easy to dismiss. He was arrogant the way men become arrogant when they have been told, without interruption, for 17 years, that they are correct. That is more disturbing than cruelty. It is harder to argue with. The story of what he'd said to Captain Voss was in the mess hall by 1100. By 1230, it had been embellished. By 1400, he'd asked her to fetch coffee. By 1600, he'd told her the briefing room was for real soldiers. None of it was accurate. All of it was passed between junior officers and enlisted personnel with the breathless enthusiasm of people who had been waiting for exactly this kind of incident to give the week some texture. Most of them laughed. Some looked uncomfortable and stayed quiet. 3 people left the mess hall early. Mara Voss sat alone at a corner table, eating a meal that tasted like institutional efficiency. And she listened. She filed patterns. Who deferred to whom? Where real power flowed beneath the official hierarchy. Who laughed first and who laughed longest and who didn't laugh at all. She noted the 3 who left. She noted the 2 who made eye contact across the room in a way that wasn't amusement. She noted who sat with the Rangers. She noted who watched the door. She had been doing this work since 0600. She had been doing it under the cover of being the least interesting person in any room she entered for 11 years. She was very good at it. At 1403, she inputted her afternoon authentication code at a terminal in the secondary operations corridor. 14-digit alphanumeric sequence. She did it in under 9 seconds. Most operators took 5 minutes. Some took longer. The sequence was rotated monthly and required memorization from a classified distribution list that came through a separate channel unavailable to general staff. Sergeant Major Rice, moving through that corridor on unrelated business, saw her hands on the keypad. He stopped walking. He looked at what she had done. Then he looked at her. Then he continued at exactly the same pace, because 34 years of practice had made him very good at not showing what he was thinking. He added it to the picture. At 15:37, she was passing the equipment cage when her sleeve pulled back past her wrist, reaching for a door handle, nothing dramatic. And Rice, 40 feet behind her, saw the edge of the tattoo. Not clearly, not completely, just the border of it, visible for 2 seconds before the sleeve fell back. Geometric, precise. Black ink where a watch strap sits. He kept walking. His pace did not change, but something in his chest did something involuntary and sudden, and he breathed through it carefully, and he did not stop until he was around the corner. He had seen that design before. Once, 11 years ago. On a man named Thomas Varro, 3 days before Varro was listed killed in action in the Nevada high desert. The record said training accident. Rice had known Varro, not well, enough. Enough to know that the man did not make the kind of errors that training accidents require. He had never been able to say that to anyone who could do anything about it. He was beginning to think that might be about to change. The afternoon brought new indignities. At 1600, Harlan found her in the secondary intelligence suite, cross-referencing signals intercepts against a travel manifest. He stood in the doorway with 2 of his staff officers, studying the documents she was working from with the expression of a man who has found exactly what he was looking for. Captain, those materials require a Tier 3 clearance. Yes, sir. You're listed as Tier 2 access. She looked up at him. Her eyes held no urgency, no apology, no fear. The kind of stillness that makes certain kinds of men feel they are being measured rather than addressed. What were you doing at 0500 this morning? System diagnostics. Why at 0500? Light traffic, better performance data. You were in the secure server room without logging a reason. I logged it at 600 when the log system came back online after scheduled maintenance. Harlan stepped further into the room. His shadow fell across her workspace. He stood there for 3 seconds, reading her face for something he didn't find. His voice dropped lower. I'm initiating a credential verification, standard procedure when access anomalies are flagged. A pause. You understand? Completely, sir. He had expected pushback, some variety of protest or deflection, anything that would give him something to work with. She gave him nothing. She looked at him with those gray eyes and then returned to the documents, calmly, as though the conversation had already concluded and she was being polite by letting him stand there a moment longer. He stood there 1 moment longer. Then he left. He filed the credential challenge at 1623. During the review period, her access would be restricted. She would be confined to base, quartered in temporary housing under administrative review. He filed it with the satisfaction of a man who has identified a problem and taken appropriate action. At 0758, the following morning, a small crowd had assembled in the corridor outside administrative processing. Word had spread the way it always does, faster than facts, louder than truth. What people were saying was that the credential query had triggered a response from a server nobody at Camp Pendleton could access directly. That the system had flagged the request and routed it somewhere none of them could trace. That the flag had come back with an authentication requirement above everyone's tier. This was the part that made people quiet in a different way than they had been quiet before. She controlled her breathing. 4 in, hold 4, 4 out, hold 4. She surrendered her badge, her access card, her system credentials, All of it with the unhurried cooperation of someone who knows exactly which pieces of the board are already in position and has been watching the other player move toward them for a very long time. She kept her watch. Nobody thought to ask for it. The holding room was 6 by 10 feet. Concrete walls, metal bench bolted to the floor, a window near the ceiling showing only a strip of California sky and the upper edge of a pine tree. The smell of disinfectant failing to cover something older, something institutional and indifferent. The kind of room that exists to communicate that you do not matter here. This is the near-fail moment, the point where anyone watching from the outside would think she is finished, caught, suspended, game over. Except games have rules, and she was about to show them they had been playing the wrong game entirely. Her watch read 10:47. In 19 minutes, an automated check-in protocol she had initialized at 500, requiring a biometric confirmation she had deliberately not provided, would transmit a status flag to a routing address that bypassed every communications network currently operating at Camp Pendleton. The flag would be logged at a facility whose existence was classified above the access level of anyone currently on this base. In 58 minutes, a secondary protocol she had set in motion 72 hours before her arrival would automatically forward her operational status, her precise location, and a full précis of the access denial to a 3-person oversight committee that did not appear in any organizational chart that Colonel Richard Harlan had ever been briefed on. In approximately 2 hours and 14 minutes, Colonel Harlan was going to learn the difference between apparent authority and actual power. She sat with her back straight. Her hands rested flat on her thighs. She controlled her breathing, 4 in, hold 4, 4 out, hold 4. And she thought about Thomas Varro, about his file, sealed at a classification level she hadn't been able to access until 14 months ago. About his wife and 2 daughters in Oceanside, who had been given a folded flag, a closed casket ceremony, and a telephone call explaining that the details of the incident could not be disclosed for operational security reasons. About the word accident, which appeared in the official record 4 times, and which she had spent 14 months proving wrong. About the financial transfer records moving between a Camp Pendleton contractor network and an overseas account registered to a shell company dissolved 18 days after Varro's death. About the 3 other names beneath his on the list she was carrying. She looked at the watch. 19 minutes. The watch was a G-Shock 5600 in matte black, the kind that doesn't catch light, doesn't draw attention, doesn't look like anything worth confiscating. She had worn it on every operation for 6 years. It had a small scratch on the face from a wall in Kabul 6 years and 3 identities ago. She was the only person alive who knew what that scratch was from. The people who had been in that room with her in Kabul were all accounted for. 3 were still active. 2 were on the list. 1 was the name she didn't have yet. She controlled her breathing. Sergeant Major Rice found Harlan at 11:01 in the corridor outside the senior staff offices. He said it quietly, the way he said everything that mattered. "I'd be very careful about that woman, Colonel." Harlan looked at him with the tolerant, mildly impatient expression of a man who has decided that experience without rank is a kind of pleasant irrelevancy. "The review is standard procedure." "Yes, sir." Rice held his gaze. "I've seen that tattoo before. Once. I think you should know that." Something moved behind Harlan's eyes. Not enough to name, enough to register. Then the professional composure resettled over it, smooth and practiced and entirely automatic. "Appreciate the input," Harlan said, and walked on. Rice watched him go. He said nothing else. He did not mention Thomas Varro, or authentication codes entered in under 9 seconds, or rifle grips that only exist at schools most people never hear of. He simply watched the colonel walk away and made a decision, quietly and fully, the way decisions get made when a man has 34 years of calibrated judgment to draw on. At 11:09, the first protocol triggered. The status flag transmitted cleanly to a routing address hosted outside every DoD network operating at Camp Pendleton. The address was answered. The response generated two simultaneous actions: a priority notification to a 2-star general at the Defense Intelligence Agency, and an automated communication to a domestic liaison office in Washington, D.C., that coordinated, among other classified functions, the operational assignments of individuals whose personnel files were maintained at a tier called Ultraviolet. Captain Mara Voss did not appear in the Ultraviolet system as a captain. At 11:43, 3 vehicles arrived at the main gate. Not standard transport. Command birds, black SUVs with federal plates, unmarked, moving with the purposeful, unhurried speed that communicates this is not a social visit and is not going to take very long. The gate sentries cleared them through in under 90 seconds. They drove directly to the administrative building without asking for directions. Word moved through the base. It always does. By the time the vehicles reached the building, there was already a loose perimeter of personnel who had found reasons to be in the vicinity. Analysts with tablets, instructors on extended breaks, the 4 Rangers who had not yet left. Standing in a stairwell doorway with their arms at their sides and their faces carefully neutral. Harlan was briefed by his aide at 11:47. The aide used the phrases Federal Observers, DIA Liaison, and Pentagon Coordination, and Harlan's face, which had been composed and professionally satisfied with itself all morning, made a change. Just for a heartbeat. Something flickered across it. Then it was gone. He walked to the administrative corridor at a controlled pace. 2 senior staff with him. The expression of a man arriving at a situation with the authority to resolve it. He performed it very well, because he had been performing it for 17 years, and he had never had reason to stop. The holding room door opened at 11:52. Mara Voss stood. She had not been pacing. She had been sitting with her back straight and her hands flat on her thighs. And she stood the way someone stands when they have been waiting for something they already know is coming. No urgency, no visible relief, just the quiet arrival at the next phase of work. The DIA liaison entered behind Harlan. Trim, civilian dress. She introduced herself as nothing. She looked at Mara with the expression of a professional who has just confirmed a very significant suspicion. Commander Voss, there are discrepancies we need to resolve. Yes, Mara said. There are. She pushed her left sleeve up past the forearm. The room detonated. Gasps, actual audible gasps, from multiple personnel. The DIA liaison's entire body locked into stillness in the space of a breath. Her hand drifted involuntarily toward her credentials before she stopped it. The aide behind Harlan made a sound, not a word. Just a compressed exhalation. The kind that escapes before composure can stop it. From the corridor, someone dropped a tablet. The clatter rang out like a gunshot in the held silence. The AC hum became suddenly deafening. A boot scuffed tile. A chair scraped concrete somewhere down the corridor. These small sounds filled every available space because nothing larger was happening. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The tattoo was small. Black ink on the inside of her left forearm where a watch strap sits. Geometric, precise, angular. A design that meant nothing to someone without context, and meant everything to someone who had spent enough years inside certain classified operational circles. The DIA liaison had held an ultraviolet clearance for 9 years. She had seen this insignia on exactly 3 people in her career. One served on the Joint Chiefs. One was assigned to a program that officially did not exist. The third had been listed as killed in action in an operation the liaison still could not discuss without signed authorization. Not standard identification. Something rarer than that. She turned to Harlan. Her voice was perfectly level. The kind of level that requires effort. "Colonel, step back from this individual." What is..." Harlan's voice had changed entirely. The theatrical register was gone. He sounded for the first time like a man who has lost the ground under him. "What is this?" "Step back. Now." The corridor had acquired an audience without anyone noticing exactly when. The 4 Rangers were there, and 3 analysts, and 2 of Harlan's junior captains, who had thought this morning that they understood the situation and did not think so anymore. Sergeant Major Rice stood at the far end, arms at his sides, watching with the expression of a man who had arrived at a conclusion 24 hours ago and was now watching the rest of the room catch up. The second convoy arrived at 11:56. 4 generals in service dress blues, 2 Pentagon liaisons, a man from the office of the Secretary of Defense whose clearance level required a separate access protocol just to confirm. They walked the corridor with the pace of people who do not need to rush, because authority like theirs precedes them. General Adeyemi, 4 stars, Joint Chiefs, entered the holding room. She looked at Mara Voss. She looked at the tattoo. She looked at the DIA liaison, who gave one small, precise nod. General Adeyemi's hand rose. Slowly, deliberately. The wrist aligned, the angle formal, the salute absolute and held. Then the Pentagon liaison raised his hand. Then the D liaison. The salute moved through the holding room and then out through the doorway and down the corridor the way fire moves across dry ground. The Rangers first, because they had spent enough time near classified operations to understand immediately what they were looking at. Then the analysts on instinct, then Harlan's own staff officers, their hands rising with the reflexive speed of people who have just understood something enormous and are responding to it before the conscious mind has finished processing. 41 hands. The exact same 41 people who had watched Colonel Richard Harlan call her sweetheart 22 hours ago in this same building stood now with their right hands raised. The room was very quiet. Not the nervous quiet from the briefing suite yesterday morning. Not the uncomfortable quiet of people unsure whether to laugh. This was the kind of silence that makes people check exits. Deep, textured, total. Someone's radio crackled once from a holster somewhere down the corridor. No one moved to answer it. The AC hum was the loudest thing in the building. A boot shifted on concrete. A breath. Then nothing again. Harlan did not raise his hand. His face cycled through surprise, then something trying to be disbelief. Then something he could not name and could not stop. Genuine fear, the very quiet kind. The kind that arrives when a man realizes completely and without any available exit that he has made a mistake from which no rank, no performance, no 17 years of perfect evaluations can extract him. His face went still. His blood ran cold. He went rigid where he stood, not theatrical, just still. General Adeyemi looked at him. She did not raise her voice. "Every person in this corridor, Colonel, including myself, answers to her authority." His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Sergeant Major Rice, from the far end of the corridor, raised his hand. Not because he was ordered to. Not because hierarchy demanded it. He raised it because 34 years of service had taught him to recognize the real thing when he was standing in its presence. And because he had noticed things he hadn't been able to act on sooner. And because this was the only form of acknowledgement available to him that meant anything at all. His salute was the chosen kind. Not commanded, not reflexive, chosen from knowledge and 34 years of careful judgment. It was the one that mattered most. General Adeyemi turned to Mara. Her voice changed, not softer, but direct. One professional addressing another. Commander Voss, your cover is dissolved. Do you need anything before we proceed? 2 minutes with the evidence package, Mara said. Then we begin. The evidence was already located. A signals intelligence team had documented it 40 minutes ago. A drive in the false bottom panel of Harlan's private storage unit, containing 6 years of selectively sanitized intelligence reports, 3 financial transfer records between a Camp Pendleton contractor network and an overseas account registered to a shell company dissolved 18 days after Thomas Varro's death, and a suppressed investigative file labeled Varro, Thomas, case closed. The case had not been closed. The case had been buried. And Harlan had known. The financial records made that plain. Payments timed to the suppression of the investigative file, correspondence routed through the shell company, a second hard drive found later in his vehicle that contained 3 years of communication with a network that had been listed as inactive since 2019. It had not been inactive. It had simply learned to route through contractors with legitimate access and a ranking officer who found it personally convenient to ensure certain inquiries went nowhere. Thomas Varro had gotten close. 3 other operators had gotten close. Close enough to be dangerous, not close enough to survive what came next. Mara Voss had gotten closer. The arrests happened quietly. No drama, no raised voices, no resistance. 2 federal agents walked Harlan out through the side entrance at 12:18. His senior staff were sequestered separately. The formal charges would come through official channels with the kind of institutional thoroughness that does not make for compelling video, but produces conviction rates that are very, very high. Commander Mara Voss watched them go. She was already thinking about the next phase. By 1800, the base was quiet. She sat on a bench outside the administrative building on the west-facing side, where the fence line opened onto a view of the Pacific. The light was failing in layers, orange first, then deep purple, then the indigo of evening pressing down across the water like a held breath finally released. The sky was the color of things healing towards something clean. Her watch read 1803 hours. They had laughed at her rank. They had forgotten that rank was the smallest thing she carried into that building. She thought about Thomas Varro, about his daughters, who were 10 and 13 now, about the file, 37 pages, sealed above the reach of anyone who might have asked the right questions, about 3 other names she had carried for 14 months, names that now had answers attached to them. Incomplete answers, imperfect, but enough. Enough to reopen the records. Enough to give 4 families something other than the word accident and a folded flag. 3 names resolved. 3 networks. 3 buried files now under formal federal review. 1 name remained. She had a photograph. Surveillance image from a rooftop in Damascus 18 months ago. A figure at a specific elevation, specific angle, specific window. The image was taken by a signals drone running a separate tasking that had nothing to do with the Camp Pendleton network, which was why whoever had scrubbed the other surveillance records had missed it. Whoever they were good. Professional-grade erasure on everything that should have shown them. But nobody erases everything, because nobody knows everything is being watched. She had the photograph. She had the window. She had the date, the time, and the angle of morning light that told her which direction the building faced. She did not yet have the name. A figure at a specific elevation, specific angle, specific window. Someone who had passed signals intelligence to the Camp Pendleton network 6 months before Varro died, and then vanished from every accessible record. A person who had not appeared in Harlan's drive, who had covered their tracks more carefully than any of the others, who was still operating, somewhere, under a different name. Silence is a weapon too, Patience isn't weakness. She controlled her breathing. 4 in, hold 4, 4 out, hold 4. The pattern was not meditation. It was not comfort. It was calibration, keeping the instrument precise, the attention clear, the emotional temperature at a level that permitted useful thought, rather than the kind of thinking that circles back on itself and produces nothing. She had learned this breathing in a program that no longer officially exists, from an instructor who had told her on the first day that the most dangerous thing in any operation is the gap between what you feel and what you can do. Close the gap. Control the breath. The evening was warm and smelled of salt and cut grass and something faintly chemical she had long since learned to ignore. A gull crossed the last of the light. Somewhere on the base, someone was playing music softly through a speaker, something she didn't recognize, something with a piano and a long pause between the verses. The sound drifted out toward the water and disappeared. The sky darkened another degree. Tomorrow brought new ghosts to hunt. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to MVP Stories for more.